Welcome to everybody for our January 2019 community meeting, board meeting. I'm not even sure what we call it anymore. It is a pleasure to be with everybody. And we are going to, if you are watching and tweeting, please tweet to the hashtag creating the future. If you're one of the oldies but goodies who've been around for a while, we used to use the abbreviated hashtag CT Future. But Twitter has expanded the number of characters, so we're using the entire hashtag creating the future. I know that several people were going to be watching and tweeting, so we are glad that you are here. I am going to hit record so that we've got several recordings here. It is always our pleasure to go around and ask folks what has been awesome in your life. And because we would like to take advantage of time today, we're going to ask that everybody do a speed awesome. So don't take any longer than a minute and just share what has been amazing in your life. And I'm going to start with the fact that we started New Year's Day with snow in the desert and got to spend 5 hours roaming around, taking pictures of cactus and snow and cactus and snow. And that was just remarkably awesome. So anybody pipe in, tell us who you are, where you're beaming in from, and something awesome.
I'll jump in since my microphone's on already. Just say I have two quick awesomes. One, my daughter just turned 15 years old. It's amazing. Life is amazing. And also my other awesome is that I'm going to England next week and seeing a lot of people and hanging out in England.
Is that work or play?
It's both. Well, don't tell people here. It's all work.
That's great. And Angie, where are you beaming in from?
Oh, sorry, Omaha, Nebraska.
Wonderful, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm happy to go next. So I'm Susan, and I'm beaming in from Wellington, New Zealand. And I'm just going to continue on the theme of the weather and travel. So it's summer here in the Southern Hemisphere. So from Christmas Day, the sun has been bright and shiny, been to the beach almost every day, walking, relaxing. We also kind of do it right in terms of holidays down here. So kind of 3 weeks off and just really enjoying each other and yeah, this beautiful place. And the other awesome thing is that I'm going to Kathmandu, Nepal next week to do some work with some monks in their monastery. So I'm absolutely thrilled and very excited about that.
Oh, how awesome. How awesome. Wonderful. I actually have a good friend who is in Kathmandu right now. I'll connect you guys. Who's up next? What's been awesome with you? Where are you beaming in from?
I'll jump in. I'm in the Philadelphia area of Pennsylvania. We did not have a snow day today, but it's cold. And I'll say my awesome is I saw On the Basis of Sex over the weekend. And I love any movie about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, despite the fact that it makes me feel a little bit inadequate. Because I ultimately wonder why I'm sitting lazily in a movie theater eating popcorn and watching the movie as opposed to out doing something. But always walk away inspired, and I got to enjoy it with my older daughter, who I enjoy anytime we watch anything about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She decides she should be a lawyer, so we'll see what happens.
Yay. Awesome, thank you, Iffy.
I will chime in. So as I shared just a few moments ago, it's echoing Hildy's. We have a snow day here in Washington, D.C., so which is where I'm beaming in from. And the awesome was both of my girls, 9 and 12, going out on their own and traipsing around and sledding and all of that, which, not requiring the parental oversight to carry sleds and, trudge people up and down the hills is wonderful.
That's awesome. That is awesome, awesome, awesome.
I'll jump in. Trey here from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I would say the highlight of my awesome in the last couple of months was being sous chef to my 24-year-old niece, who hosted her first ever Christmas dinner for the entire family. So that was super fun.
Oh, that's delightful. That is just delightful.
Excuse me, Rebecca here. I'm beaming in from McCall, Idaho. Beyond knee deep, probably eyeballs deep in snow, which is how we like it here. So very cold and awesome was having my sister who turned 50 yesterday and my niece who is in college and home, to have them here for the weekend with us. And other than sleeping, we were outside playing. So skiing, snowshoeing, and watching my budding photographer niece find all kinds of things to shoot in my personal playground.
Rebecca calls where she lives her snow globe.
Having been there, I agree.
And how about you, Dimitri? What's awesome with you?
Well, since we're encompassing this awesome in a larger time frame than I was thinking, I want to go back and talk about just before Thanksgiving, seeing all our three children, Hildy's daughter and my two boys, get together. They kind of grew up together, and they don't often all three get together. So we got to spend a really fun dinner with them in Los Angeles, or actually in Glendale. And it's just always a hoot to have them together. And then as a parent, it's also amazing to realize they're adults. I mean, you're having adult conversations with these adults. So my awesome is life is wonderful. It's great to watch that happen.
Yay. Yay. And I see Vu is joining us.
Hi everyone, my apologies for being late.
Oh, no apologies needed. We are just going around saying who we are, where we are, and something that has been awesome for us. And actually, you're up.
Hi everyone, my name is Vu. I work with a nonprofit in Seattle called Rainier Valley Corps. We're trying to bring more leaders of color into the nonprofit sector. And something that's awesome is we're launching a new fellowship program to bring more leaders of color into the environmental sector.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
If you want to, I see that your last name is spelled with an extra E. So if you want to get in there and switch that up, so you're right.
Oh, I'm good.
You good?
Yeah, that's okay.
You answer to anything. I've gotten used to answering to anything that starts with an H because people do me Heidi and Holly. So we answer to anything.
Great.
I'm just so glad everybody is here. And I thought I would give just a little tiny bit of background for folks who may be watching either now or later. And if you're watching this afterwards and you've got comments, throw them into the blog. We're not watching the blog right now. We'll only watch Twitter right now. But if you are watching this later, throw those comments into the blog and we will all chime in on it. Most of you know that we have been working on, we sort of loosely call it restructuring, creating the future, but it really is structuring, determining what is the structure we need that will accomplish our mission. And making the assumption that there are, short of what's legal, which is about this big, there's really little that an organizational structure has to be. The one decision we did make that it would have to be is that it would have to pass muster with the Internal Revenue Service so that we could maintain our tax exemption. But short of that a structure can be anything that we want it to be. And the question that we kept asking is, what is a structure that would accomplish social missions? Because we all know that the structure that we currently have in this sector primarily mirrors the business sector and is not intended for accomplishing social missions. And we wind up with all kinds of things working at cross purposes. And so what we have come up with is a structure that, without going into lots and lots of detail, what we found was that organizations in general, and if you look at the fiduciary obligations, it is to support the organization. And what we're creating is an organization whose purpose is to not support the organization, but for the organization to support the people who are actually doing the work. And that could be anybody. It could be folks doing a project out in goodness knows where that may or may not be tightly or loosely affiliated with creating the future. Making sure that folks have what they need to accomplish our mission, which is to build more humane systems throughout the world. One of the things that will support people doing their work is knowing that we're legal, knowing that we are compliant, knowing that we're maintaining that 501c3 status. And we have been so impressed with what we're learning from the folks in New Zealand in Spiral about looking differently at how boards work within that system. So our intention was never to build a new governance system. It was to build a structure overall that would help us accomplish our mission. But part of that is the board. And part of that is because, again, we wanted to maintain the legal status. And what Inspiral has done is created what they call a minimum viable board, which is basically what is it that we need to be to keep us legal, and a wonderful system for participatory decision-making. And we've been moving in that direction of participatory decision-making for years. Our board meetings are all like this, where you can't tell who's on the board, who's a community member, who's tweeting in. They're open, they're streaming, and inviting people in to help make decisions as we're making decisions. That's not just our board meetings, but all of our strategy meetings. And so going in that direction just feels sort of natural for us. And we are honored today to have Susan Basterfield, who is a board member at Inspiral and an active member of Inspiral, who got up at some ungodly time of the morning to be with us today. And Susan, I'm so pleased that you're here, and I know that our folks have all kinds of questions, but if you could just sort of start, give us a little bit of an intro into the structure of Inspiral, what Inspiral is, and then we can pound you with questions.
Thanks, Hildy. Lovely to meet everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. Your work resonates around the globe. So many loose ties and connections that are kind of starting to pull tighter. And I think that if I'm thinking about what I'm reflecting on from last year and into this year, is that I'm really feeling like our global ecosystem is starting to be able to see itself. And once we're able to actually see ourselves and each other, then we'll be able to learn and grow together. So that's kind of like this like anxious intention and joy that I'm feeling coming into 2019. So thanks very much. Inspiral is, I was just reflecting on how you were describing your mission and your project, because I think that it's very, very similar intentions, which is basically more people working on stuff that matters and creating the word structure is getting stuck in my craw as I'm trying to say it, because I think that's the right word. To support more people to do that. So I'm very excited about sort of the similarities in our mission. When I think about when I'm asked to describe Inspiral, it's always very difficult for me to do it. So I appreciate you asking me to describe it from sort of a system governance perspective, because that's a little bit easier, but not much. So please bear with me. So Inspiral has, I would say, 3 layers of participatory, quote unquote, membership. So Inspiral is I guess like a global vibe. So it was really lovely last year at our summer festival, so our annual gathering. A friend of Inspiral by the name of Huia Lambi described Inspiral as a verb instead of a noun. So I like to think that there's heaps of people around the world that are inspiraling. So like coming with the similar intention of really truly believing that we can do the work we love with the people we love and change the planet and change the future. So that's kind of where we come from. So I would consider everybody here on this call, listening, tweeting, that we are inspiraling right now. And I kind of like that idea. One of the things that I think that has protected or kept Inspiral safe is the idea that you can't just rock up and join, right? So in order to officially participate in Inspiral, you have to be invited. And it's not like a membership scheme where you come in and you have to meet a certain criteria or fill in a form. It's actually a literal self-generated proactiveness to create relationships. So, for example, any of you, Iffy, if you were feeling kind of drawn to Inspiral, you would have a conversation with somebody who would have a deep listening conversation with you, understand what you're about, what your needs are, what you'd like to do. I would introduce you to a few other people, have multiple conversations, and over the course of building those relationships, if it felt like Inspiral was something that you wanted to explore, you would be invited in as a contributor. And for as soon as that happens, you get switched on to all of our internal comms. So our Slack, our Lumio, which is the place we make decisions, be able to equally participate with anybody else in any working groups, about 95% of the decision making, and yeah, start actively participating in the community. Now, equally as there's no sort of list of criteria one needs to meet to be invited in as a contributor to Inspiral, it's the same with membership. So a member of Inspiral is simply a human that is seen to be actively and preciously, precious may be the wrong word, actively and empathetically, compassionately stewarding the mission of Inspiral. So again, there's no rule as to how long you need to be a contributor before you get invited into membership, or what the rules are there. But after a period of time, the existing members who are also owners may invite you in to become a co-owner in the collective. So currently there are 23 humans that each have one non-financial share in the Inspiral Foundation. So from a legal perspective, we are the owners of the entity. And from that membership are currently 4 self-selecting humans who serve on the minimum viable board. So myself, Anthony Cabral, Robert Guthrie, and Bart DeVries are the current cohort of directors of the Inspiral Foundation. So that's sort of how the basic kind of layers work. I think that it's important for me to talk about some of the other roles and groups in Inspiral that do the work, but I'm just going to tap the brakes there to just make sure that that was clear and I answered the question you were asking.
It's very, very clear. When you talk about, is Inspiral a for-profit? Is it a nonprofit? Is it, what do folks do there?
So it's very important to understand that Inspiral doesn't employ anybody. And Inspiral is a limited liability company. Now, some reasons that we chose to do that was mostly because we did need to move money around. And in New Zealand, the not-for-profit status really limited our ability to both potentially generate and distribute money. So we are a limited liability company with a charitable constitution. But we don't employ anybody. So let me talk a little bit about that, the way the financial flows work and why this happens. So So one of the reasons that we chose to be a limited liability company was that it allowed us to partner with organizations without restriction. So for example, we had for many years, a public-private partnership with the New Zealand government. We have had relationships with other organizations where it's been important for us to be a limited liability company, with some of the contractual arrangements that we had with some of the spaces that we've occupied in terms of leases, etc. And it's interesting because over time, we've moved away from needing the Inspiral Foundation to be a place that was like a financial entity. So I'll give you some examples. So Inspiral Foundation currently only holds one contract, and that's with Optimi, who are our operations and two. Optimi for our operational administration, and a company called Fairground, who are accountants. So we have no other contractual arrangements. And the reason we've been able to do that is that our ventures have become strong enough to be able to hold that role. So for example, this year we've got our Summerfest. We used to, Inspiral Foundation, for example, used to be the entity from which, through which resources for our gatherings and our retreats and our public facing events flowed. Our Summer Festival for this year, for example, is being hosted by an Inspiral venture called The Hum. And so all of the monies are flowing through that. The book that we're writing, Better Work Together, How the Power of Community Can Transform Your Business, an Inspiral company called The Golden Pandas is actually like acting as the holding company or the kind of the financial back end of this particular project. So the reason that we're able to operate as a minimum viable board is that we're not really making financial decisions anymore. So I think that that's one of the elements of the governance that allows us to basically truly just be a compliance-focused entity.
And so who is making the financial decisions?
So the financial decisions are extremely limited. So we have a financial agreement, which anybody can see in the Inspiral handbook. The financial decision, so I'll give you an example. One of the big financial decisions for last year was that as we had our government partnership contract had ended, and that contract was providing the Inspiral Foundation with a good portion of its operating budget. What we found was that when that went away, we were leading a little bit of money every month. And so a runway for the financial viability of the Inspiral Foundation started to appear. And so a working group called Balancing the Books self-formed, and over the course of about 8 months put together various and iterating proposals for which the contributorship and the membership of Inspiral could and would make the foundation perpetually viable. And so when you're talking about making decisions about finances, the proposal was made by an organic group of people with consultation and with participatory decision-making. And over a course of about 8 months, we landed on our new funding model, which is and has been in place now for about 6 months. And it's made at our current level of membership and contributorship has ensured that the Inspiral Foundation is perpetually viable. So that's one answer to how we make decisions about money. When we look at the actual literal finances in the bank, we, as any great, fiduciarily responsible board, we have reserves and emergency reserves. we do not have any power to make decisions about how those finances are spent. So we have introduced, and I think it's still in consultation, a proposal to everybody to amend the financial agreement to say that when our reserves hit a certain buffer level, then the board has the opportunity to release the additional funds into a co-budget round. So this is another very important part of how we spend money at Enspiral, is that we do participatory budgeting. So for the past, probably maybe 12 months, we have been doing quarterly rounds of collaborative budgeting, where anybody in the organization can raise what we call a bucket to fund pieces of work, core work in Enspiral. So some of the examples of the work that's been funded over the last little while has been revamping the website, doing some work around creating a new venture agreement, doing work around helping to bootstrap some of the initial communications and some of the like prepayments around Summer Festival. There's been some bootstrapping around, sorry, proposals or buckets, specifically around how we can just optimize some of our other processes like onboarding, etc. But each of the decisions for that money is actually down to the membership or the contributors. If people are not using their allocated co-budget funds to fund this work, then the assumption is that work is not valuable to the community. And so the funds go to the work that is seen as the most valuable for the community. So that's how the money's spent. So yeah, just back to the question, as a board member, I've got very little like fiduciary latitude. And I guess there's never been a lot of money flowing through that system anyway. We've always been super explicit about the separation. The Enspiral Foundation there is to be the minimum viable support for people to actually do the work. But where people do the work is in their own ventures and in their own entities.
So Enspiral, just as a point of information for folks who don't know, you guys are pretty much like a collaborative or collective of social entrepreneurs.
And businesses.
And they're all out doing their own ventures, their own businesses. And what Enspiral provides to those ventures, whether they are startups or businesses or individuals, is what?
A place to have to not to do it alone. A very rich seam of amazing people with different skills and talents. A place for us to actually be, for me especially, like the efficacy in the work that I do out there in the world with organizations would be I think not something I could do with authenticity if I wasn't actually participating in like this hyper experimental collective of full participatory governance. And everybody, like I said initially, that everybody would answer that question differently in terms of what Enspiral means for them. It's, I think, becoming more a place also, and maybe it always was, a place where humans that actually feel like we can have a different relationship with our work and our ongoing development as adults in the world, a place to do that safely, a place to do that where it's encouraged to actually be fully human, and to actually do that relational work with people who want to support you to do that. Because unfortunately, as we know, in 99.9% of companies today, that's not something that's recognized, valued, or encouraged.
Right. One of the things that's a little bit different about what Creating the Future is currently envisioning, and I say envisioning because we have no idea once we live this 5 years from now what it's going to be. but it's sort of a blend of supporting people who may be out in the world doing a project, and doing our own projects. So that is one difference where Creating the Future is teaching, for example. Creating the Future we do have programs, we're doing demonstration projects, we do, and want to provide whatever support can be provided to people who want to come together and be with each other and be in relationship. So seeing that blend. You mentioned that the board itself does not make decisions. What does the board do? And then I'd love to ask questions about how decisions are made.
So what the board does is, first and foremost, make sure that we're meeting our legal and fiduciary responsibilities. So making sure that tax returns get filed, making sure that we've got adequate money in the bank, making sure that we're legal. The board, it's really interesting because we are always calling each other, and it's taken us quite a few. I think we've been together as a board now for 15 months in the cohort that we are now currently. That we're always really specific in board meetings that it's easy for us to get off track and put on different hats. So it's very important for us that when we're in the board, that we have only our board hat on. So it's like, for example, it's very easy for us to notice something that might be going on in the community and start to have a discussion around maybe potential solutions or how to fix it. And we'll very quickly then pull each other in and say, okay, right, I've got my working group hat on right now, or I've got my catalyst hat on right now. And we need to really bring it back to that. So what we really make, we don't have any decision-making power, which is incredibly different from a board perspective. What we do have is the opportunity to start conversations and provide maybe a little bit of guidance. So I'll give you an example. For a couple of years, we had a contract with contributor to write our internal communication, our internal newsletter. There was a decision last year where she was getting too busy and needed to part company. And so we decided that it wasn't the board's role to contract somebody within the community to write the newsletter. So what we did was we started a conversation that says, Jess is no longer doing our newsletter. It'd be great for a subset of the community that gets energy from that to step up and make a proposal to the community about the newsletter. So rather than in many organizations where it'd be, oh crap, we've lost our internal journalist, we need to go out and employ somebody. It was just noticing this and making an invitation to the community to, create the solution from wherever that felt right.
So you are, I mean, part of the practice is the noticing and then making sure that whatever you're noticing is going right back out to the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and this is where it gets a little blurry between the board and the catalysts, because the catalysts are really the operational brain and heart and body of the organization. So the catalysts are really dealing with the day-to-day operations. So the board would only do that in like these very specific areas of, I guess what we call core, like the core running or the core compliance of the foundation.
the things that if somebody was legally saying, okay, so where's the board in all of this?
Mm-hmm.
That's the stuff.
Mm.
Now, when you say catalysts, are the catalysts the members? Are they the ventures? Who are the catalysts?
So the catalyst, we are into the third iteration of the catalyst experiment. So about 3 or 4 years ago, it was after we did our refactor, which is a whole other conversation. So just briefly on the refactor. So Inspiral went along for about 5 years without really codifying anything. So about 3 years ago, it was time. And that's when our first sort of round of true participatory governance happened. A group of high context individuals in Inspiral spent 3 or 4 months proposing some of the core foundational agreements that you see in our handbook. So the financial agreement, the decision-making agreement, the catalyst agreement. And those were brought to the community and those were ratified by the community. And so one of the things as we started getting bigger and it became less possible for like the organic governance and management of the entity, the idea was that let's invite humans that have that, that get the energy from having high context and actually noticing what work needs to be done and doing the work, much like would be like a I guess the C-suite in a normal organization. And so we had, there was the first experiment, which Chloe was part of, who I think is in and around this community. I was in the second iteration of the Catalyst experiment. So the first iteration of the Catalyst experiment, there was some money floating around from a grant that we'd received. The second iteration or experiment of the Catalyst experiment, the idea was that the Catalyst would be funded to do the work through venture contributions. So that worked for a little while and then it didn't work. So in my cohort, there were 3 of us, myself, Joshua Weil, and Richard Bartlett, and we worked for about 15 months. And if you think about that's really where the idea of the whole, all of the moving parts of the organization come together, and the work actually gets allocated to be done. This is not what the board does, right? And this current iteration of the Catalyst experiment, we are funding. We've had one Catalyst for the past year. We've just approved the funding. Not I say us. Co-Budget has just allocated some funding for a second Catalyst to come on board. And really what the Catalysts do is activate the working groups. So that's like the next layer. So one of the things that frustrated me when I was a Catalyst was I couldn't understand why more people were not stepping into the posture of Catalysts to be able to kind of, see all the moving pieces and engage the work. And in reality, one of the reasons I think that is true is because we don't have a lot of time, and people have different gifts to bring or get energy for different things. So the idea of working groups focused on specific parts of the entity is something that we've been experimenting really heavily with for the past 2 years and has become really powerful in the community. So if you look at the working groups, we've got the Well working group, we've got a gatherings working group, we've got our communications working group, we've got our brand working group, and we've also got working groups that spin up and spin down for specific projects. And so what the Catalyst really does is ensure that all of the working groups have what they need, that they're communicating with each other, and that they're communicating with the community. So that's what the Catalyst does.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you.
Susan, where do the working groups come from? How do they generate?
So they either self-generate, or there might be a suggestion from the board that this is something that I think we need to pay attention to. And what do people think about? Does anybody have energy for forming a working group? It could also come from the Catalysts. Many working groups actually come from our gatherings. So, our summer festival and our winter retreat often does spark off working groups. A great example of that is the Stewards working group. So I think 3 or 4 years ago, our winter retreat was on the topic of stewardship. And from that retreat sprung the idea of doing stewardship as a core component of the collective and the stewardship working group sprung from that.
If he had asked a question, playing out the newsletter example, if nobody stepped up as feeling energized to do that, what would happen? And so nothing would happen, there'd be no newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, and what role would the board play in that?
If we saw that it was still something that felt like it was missing, we might just gently continue to encourage, or every so often pop a note into the Slack. Oh, are people missing the newsletter? It'd be great if somebody stepped up. But equally, if I'm honest, I could, even as a board member, take off my board hat and put on my anxious newsletter journalistic hat and step up for that. Sure.
Right. Okay. Okay. Could you talk now about the participatory decision making? How does it work? Who gets to decide? Who just start someplace, and what the both decision making in general? Actually, co-budgeting is just a form of decision making. Is one decision that has to be made. How does that work?
Mm. So we have created something that I need to think more deeply about, and maybe even write about. We've got a proposal-based culture. So anybody in the organism can propose anything, and proposals often start from just an idea, a conversation. So, for example, I'm thinking about. Well, I'll give you a real example. So the Better Work Together book is the entity that's holding the finances is currently the Golden Pandas. The Golden Pandas did that role just because it had a bank account, and I'm also a director of that entity, and it just was easy. As we're getting closer to the release of the book, we want to change the entity through which the finances for the Inspire World book are flowing, and we want to move it over to the Greater Than Collective because myriad reasons, because Optimi is doing the operational administration there, and it just makes sense on so many levels. In most organizations, I would just make that decision, right? I participate in both of those entities. I participate in Inspiral, but in Inspiral, we really are interested in, is this the right thing? So it wasn't me, it was actually Anthony that just recently put a proposal up on Lumio, which is our decision-making platform, saying we propose to move the finances for the book from Golden Pandas to the Greater Than Collective. These are the reasons we're doing it. What do people think? So even before the proposal phase, there's something that is inviting the collective wisdom to help us think. Because we're distributed, we're no longer all in Wellington anymore. We're distributed all over the world. So I think this overlap between having a proposal-based culture and really honestly valuing the input of the collective hive mind allows us to do participatory decision-making in a way that feels easeful for the most part and just flows. So I expect that Anthony will keep this inquiry or this curiosity like that for about a week. He'll collect and see who's interested in having a conversation or giving feedback, and then he'll make a proposal. I propose that we move the bank accounts as of February 1st, and then it'll be basically approve, abstain, which is a very important part of our culture. When you're yellow thumbing something or abstaining, it can mean many things. It can mean, you know what, I really, this decision isn't important to me, so I want to indicate that it's not that important to me. It might be, I just got so much on, I trust everybody else to make the decision. It might literally be, I think it's okay, I really don't care. You can downvote it, which also, again, is a very important part of the culture, that you can say that I don't agree with this. I really think we could do better. go ahead if you really want to, but I just need to voice that I don't think this is necessarily the best we could do, but I'm not going to stop you from doing it. Only way that you can stop something is by blocking. And the block is used very, very rarely. The block is specifically used if you believe that this decision will be dangerous, unsafe, or take us backwards. The block happens maybe once a year. And that's just the culture that we've got into, that it's not the fastest, right? It's, you have to expect that anytime you want to make a change, that you've got to plan in your project brain, like a 2-week period, to actually, let the collective sense it, mold it if that's going to happen, and then decide whether or not consent to it. And this is the important thing, that we're not trying to build full consensus on everything, but what we are trying to do is create the opportunity for more than just this core group or individual to be able to make decisions on behalf of the collective.
And Rebecca's question, do the votes and options and thumbs also give space to explain the context and story behind your choice?
Absolutely. So in Lumia,
the importance of the yellow and the no and the talk more.
Yeah. So every time you vote in Lumio, you can say why. And also in Lumia, let's say that a proposal vote is open for a week, you can change your mind. So you might downvote or give it a green thumb, and then kind of see the reactions coming in and think, no, actually, I don't really feel this anymore. And you can actually change it midstream. But everything is, there's nothing anonymous, and everything is allowed to be commented.
So what happens if you've got something that most people just feel, all right, whatever.
So in our decision agreement, there are agreements around if different types of decisions and what type of participation you need. And for some decisions, you do need a certain percentage of green thumbs.
And that's all in your handbook.
It is.
You guys are
awesome. I have one quick follow-up question on that. I actually have 2 questions, but the second one a little way. Susan, when you started introducing this, you used the word human with a lot of intentionality. How do you deal? So, I have a limited understanding of Lumio, but it is digital. It sounds like it's words. We know that is a dehumanizing way of communicating, just text-based. So I'm curious, because you're talking about how people are able to share their impressions, what's going on with them. How is that dealt with? Is that an inherent limitation? What happens when we lose a little bit of the human interaction in that decision making?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that it does come to the fore. Mostly with decisions that are contentious or have an element of heart to them. So what we try to do in that case is, if there is a proposal, then we might schedule some Zoom calls. So if people need to do more collective sense making like this, then we'll make sure that we're incorporating anything that we can do to make sure that we are giving people with all sort of different preferences the opportunity to express that. Because Justin, for me, I find Lumio incredibly difficult, especially for contentious or emotional decisions. I am an extroverted thinker. I make sense of the world through conversation. I'm quick to move and change my opinion. But I also appreciate that for people with preference for introverted reflective thinking, that they might spend, a day or 2 days crafting the perfect response to something. And then for me to then come in and try to interact with that in a way that's spontaneous is super difficult. So I think that the first step to this is like recognizing that we've all got different preferences for communicating and making decisions, and ensuring that we are recognizing that and making the human possible. Sometimes even for bigger discussions or decisions, we will not make proposals until we've had a face-to-face, right? So over the past couple of years, there have been really heartfelt questions around membership, around different Enspiral nodes, for example, changes to governance. And we've always ensured that we've made time to have those discussions at our gatherings, and then allow whatever is going to manifest for those to happen as a result of the time we've spent together. And because, frequently, even if with all the right intention, somebody proposes something that's a huge cultural shift to the organization, it's pretty much guaranteed to get a block if we've not made room to do that in a way that's more human. Not to say that the other way isn't human, because it is, but I get what you're saying.
Thank you.
And Angie, before you go, is there any reflection that you would like to share at this time? You're muted, hon.
Just thank you for sharing about Enspiral, and I'm really interested in been looking a little bit on the website. It's great information on there, and I'm gonna take it and also go back and listen to this recording later to catch up on what I missed, and I'm sorry to have to leave early. See you guys later.
Thanks, Angie. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye, Angie.
It's what I'm getting for creating the futures thinking is there's wonderful things that we can blend with the existing culture we have of decision making, and what's becoming clear as you're talking is that we actually do have a culture of how we make decisions here. And that's sort of fun because, if somebody had asked, we would all have to say, but we do come together. The first thing we do is we have a conversation. And so I'm realizing that it's sort of fun to go, oh, we do have a culture of decision making. We've just never really codified what that is. And looking at, because again, we were talking about sort of a blend of how Enspiral operates, and also the fact that we run programs. I think that there's many things that will be blending that I like about that. And I want to welcome Carl. I'm glad that you are able to join us. Just say hello so that we know that your mic is working.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. We can hear you perfectly. It works better when you're not muted, but
I've still got holiday brain.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. We were talking before about the fact Susan's in New Zealand, and the one thing that I have found about New Zealand and Australia is that you guys really have figured out, well, you've got the perfect blend, because I think if the Christmas holidays happened in summer for the rest of the world, we'd do the same thing you do. It's like, yeah, January, we just blow that off. And the rest of us just slog through January, but you guys have the right, the right idea. Carl, what we've been doing is Susan has been sharing with us how decisions are made at Enspiral, a little bit about how the board operates, and we'll send you the recording so that you can listen back to all of that good stuff.
Susan, I have a question, and that is on the ventures that are basically under the umbrella of Enspiral. Using that loosely, definitely. What is their governance like? Is this this methodology? Is it incorporated into, or is it on an individual basis? And is that part of the decision Enspiral makes as to who is part of Enspiral?
So we're very, that's a great question. So we're really unopinionated about that. So we've got co-op, like Lumio is a full worker-owned co-op. Most of the other entities are some version of LLC with charitable constitutions or straight down the line, limited liability companies. But just like we do everything in Enspiral, if you want to become a venture, there are some steps that you need to take. So you need to propose yourself as a venture to the community for the same ratification process. You need to have a venture steward. So somebody from the organization will be your sort of interface with Enspiral as your venture steward. In most cases, it's expected but not mandated that each venture will contribute to the Enspiral Foundation. But again, we're unopinionated about that. We don't have like a set rule that you will contribute, I don't know, 5% of your annual profits or whatever. There is an expectation that there will be some level of contribution from the venture. But yeah, to answer that question, the same process of kind of sensing into are we mission aligned? Are we, is this venture really, and again, in a way that's not opinionated about the mission? Is this venture going to bring damage or harm to the reputation of Enspiral? If not, then yeah, let's go for it, because again, the real impulse behind this is creating the conditions for people to actually earn a great livelihood through working on stuff that matters to them with people that they love. So we're really trying to encourage that, and not having a very strict opinion, I think has allowed us to actually grow some magnificently diverse ventures.
So, Susan, I have a question going back to the board structure. What drew you to wanting to be a member of the board of Enspiral, and what is it that created the comfort and confidence being able to take on that role? What was it about how it was structured?
So that's a great question. So I had been serving as a catalyst for a couple of years, and my own, I guess, venture and business was becoming it was really starting to take up the time that I was able to spend on being a catalyst. I think as a catalyst, really you need to allocate at least a day a week, a day and a half a week to actually doing that. The current board, there were 2 board members that had expressed their intention to step down. And I just thought, yeah, I think that from a service perspective, really challenging myself to have less of an action-oriented posture, which is my natural way of being, right? Just get in, give me a problem, we'll fix it, I'll solve it. I guess felt like a developmental challenge for me as well. I thought that it was important for diversity that there was a female on the board. There were no other females that were kind of stepping forward. So if I'm honest, it was like just a combination of all of those elements. Looking at Robert Guthrie and Bart DeVries especially, who I'd not worked intimately with, just amazing humans. And I also really feel like a diversity of experience as well. So Robert is one of the core founding members of Lumio. Bart is a ex-physiotherapist and businessman. I'm a middle-aged ex-corporate hack, so I think really for me, it was about looking at it from all of those dimensions and feeling like, yeah, I'd really like to serve in this way.
And was there something about how Enspiral's board was structured, that role was structured, that was more compelling to you than, serving on the board of some other entity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, this is like, so much of my history, and I think that we probably all share this to a degree, like, you know, we've probably all participated with or seen boards that are just there to fill a seat and get a stipend. It's like, no, this isn't what governance is about. If we're really trying to change the future, we need to start, I guess, being the vanguard and actually modeling and sharing our experiences about what a different type of board could look like. So yeah, definitely, Justin, for sure.
Susan, if I want to be mindful of your time, what would you caution? What is the downside? What makes you nervous? What are issues that could potentially arise or have arisen, both in the board structure as a minimum viable board, focused on compliance, and the participatory decision making?
I think for me, it's been such a journey of letting go, right? Especially, I'm someone that thrives on context, right? So for me, I'm gonna ask all the questions and get all the context so that I can see the full picture, so that I can have an opinion, right? But to understand that in this current world, right, with all of our challenges around the attention economy, around all of our challenges of actually, you know, like esoterically wanting to transcend the current economic capitalistic system that we exist within, right? That there are some, we all need to make money, right? That's the way the system's set up for now. But being able to be in this mindset of, this is the long game, right? We're not going to change things in a month or a year. To be able to relax into that, but with a very clear vision of how to balance those things, I think has been absolutely essential for me. So I would caution trying to hold too many roles and wear too many hats. I think that I would caution against copying anybody too much, right? So I loved what you said before, that you maybe at the beginning of this call, if you'd asked about the decision making, you wouldn't be able to codify it. But like just thinking about it in the context of in spiraling, you might be able to. I think that my warning is, don't expect a tool or a methodology to be able to solve your problem. It's really about sensing into culturally, experientially, what works for you, and then think about how can we create systems to support the way that we are as an entity, not how we can cargo cult in something that has worked for others. So that would be my, but that makes it much harder, right? Much less sure. But I really think that this is the way that we're going to change the future, is like being willing to actually spend the time to understand what works for each of us.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we have found in our work and in our thinking is that the thinking is replicable, the doing is not. And doing is when we try and copy what somebody else is doing. And that's when people will always say, well, that could work there, but it's not going to work here because da, 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 da. But the questions can be the exact same questions. Who gets to decide? How are decisions made? How do we make sure we're compliant? What does it take? What does it take? Yeah. Anything else that you would want to make sure we know? And I want to make sure that everybody who's got questions, if you've got questions down to the, you'll pardon the expression, gnat's ass of something little and small, or big. If you've got any questions of Susan. And Susan, anything else that you would caution or hope that we would know or are excited about? Or
I mean, I think I'm just reflecting on your description of what changing the future is like. So you're running programs. You're running programs for profit.
There's some yes, some no.
Some yes, some no. So I would just notice that. Notice how that impacts the decisions that you make as a collective for your broader mission. I'm not going to judge it, but I'd invite you to kind of notice as you grow what that does and if and how that impacts decisions you make.
Susan, I was also have been looking at the website, and I was looking at the ventures that are there. And you mentioned, I think, more ventures than I see there. Is that just they're not up posted yet, or because I'm trying to do what you do is get a lay of the land. I want a big contextual picture of all this.
Yeah, no, there's heaps of ventures that aren't there yet, just because we haven't got the graphics up, or yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. Anybody have any other questions for Susan? Because I want to be mindful of your time. I know you've got another meeting. You really sock in first thing in the morning meetings. Wonderful. Well, I so appreciate your time. I think we all do. And I've appreciated the conversations that we've had. It has really informed where we're going and what we're thinking about. And I deeply appreciate your offer to continue the conversation and to be a mentor, and just thank you.
Pleasure. And just so grateful for all of you and what you're doing. And anytime I can help, or if you need an ear, or just let me know. I'm here.
Thank you so much. Thank
See
you.
ya.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. So I'm going to start with just taking a deep breath and reflections and just the stuff that's standing out to you from this conversation, and then sort of moving into the what's next conversations. But what's popping for you guys from this hour of conversation? Anything you circled in your notes or wrote as I do in red? I'll start with the fact that, Carl, you're looking dapper. Just needed to say that.
I'll start with the fact that I didn't know that Voulez was joining us today, and I get Voulez's email every week. He probably doesn't know that. And I read his blog, so I'm sort of still just thinking, like, how the hell am I here?
We wonder how the hell you're here all the time, Carl.
Carl, I think you said it was my delayed train. So,
what's popping for you guys? What stood out in the conversation?
There were two things for me. One was actually purely a rhetorical response when she started talking about how ventures had to be sponsored, and sort of you had to have and it just popped into my head, like, that's just a construct that, imagine in the work that we do, the communities that we're working with and supposedly partnering with actually had to sponsor us. That you sort of, it had to be that invitation of coming in. So that was just a rhetorical sort of broader nonprofit issue, I think, that's out there. But the other thing that did strike me is whenever someone uses fiduciary, that's one of my trigger words recently, because it does so quickly get attached to compliance, and we forget that it's trust to work and hold assets in benefit of another. But what was interesting is as the conversation went on and she talked about the systems, they were all trust building systems, so that so no one had to be a fiduciary, that there was fiduciary capacity was baked into the system design. It just, trust was built. The idea of consensus is that, you know, so much of trust is transparency. Of just, it doesn't mean we all agree. It doesn't even mean that it's the best decision, but the fact that there's transparency and that ability to say, we're holding this up for the community to assess, to challenge us, to accept, to be agnostic to. I mean, all of those things. And I just thought that really redefining that role, that sort of minimum viable role of the board is actually ensuring that the fiduciary capacity exists. So it's a shift in the thinking. We don't have to be the fiduciaries. We don't have to be the experts. We just have to make sure that the space is being held for that. And I kind of thought about this network picture of the boards in the middle, but all of those things that have, you know, compliance, you just have to ensure that compliance is happening somewhere. There's a venture that's ensuring compliance. There's a venture that's ensuring operations are happening. There's a venture that's ensuring, you know, structural and strategic thinking. So it just, again, I think it just really reinforced what we were talking about, which is we have, particularly in the States, this notion of putting all these responsibilities onto boards and board members, where really the responsibility is just to be responsible, not actually, or to ensure responsibility, not to actually do all of the work, because it's in the asking people to do it that we've ground the system to a halt and made it so ineffective. So that was my big takeaway.
Yeah, it's the thing that I'm loving about, it's the thing that's been discouraging to me about other systems that are built with the intention to distribute decision-making rather than the intention to accomplish a social mission. And when the intention is to distribute decision-making, the question that I kept having every time I looked at one of those models is, okay, who's in the middle? And there was a who that was in the middle. There was either a body that was in the middle that could ultimately decide, no, we don't want to do this anymore. Or I looked at, you know, a lot of people say, oh, this sounds sort of like holacracy. And holacracy, you know, if you look at corporations that are doing those kinds of things, there's a CEO, there's still a CEO, and the board and the CEO can still decide at any second, no, this isn't how we be. And the thing that I'm excited about and continued to be, as Susan was talking, is to have collective enoughness in the middle, to have decision-making truly be distributed, and to see compliance, legal compliance. Let's just take it at that tiny little vision of legal compliance be one thing that anybody out in the field wants to make sure that we've got. It becomes a service to the people rather than the center and everything of the end all and be all of decision making. And I love seeing compliance as a service that I need. If I'm out doing work, I need to know that if I need a grant or if I need whatever, if I've got donors, that we're compliant, that we're legal. It completely shifts the mindset when we see that as a condition for success for folks doing the work rather than the entity that makes the decisions. It's just reaffirming from what you're saying, Justin. Thank you. What else is popping for you guys?
One of the things that I was thinking about when she described it in terms of people's tendency to lock into an opinion, to lock into a position. And that the system, as she was describing it, encourages you to grow in your thinking. So if I'm initially a thumbs down, I could be a thumbs up by the time the decision's made, and that's cool. Everybody is fine with that and encouraged to be open to that thinking, to do that, as opposed to, you know, yay or nay in a board vote. Oh, I changed my mind a week later. You know, well, why did you not vote that way to begin with? And yes, that happens. Yes, people could do that, but this is much more fluid and much more organic as to the way people think and the way people are. You know, I could change my opinion.
Yeah.
What else? What stood out to you guys in the conversation? What'd you circle in your notes?
I think she spoke of there's like a stewardship working group, steward working group, yet it's an entire culture of stewardship of everyone and everything. So kind of how you are invited to be the initial contributor. And I think of how we make connections in our relationships about giving context and orientation and getting to know the whole human. And also here are ways you can learn more about catalytic thinking, because you're going to see it and feel it in action no matter what you choose to step into. So thinking of putting structures around what we're all kind of doing organically and how we show up with one another, yet the power in codifying it to be sharing it with more people to say that this is what you're experiencing, the documentation of what is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I was struck by the same thing, about the fact that when folks want to find out, be involved, whatever, that the first thing is a conversation. Yeah. How about you, Iffy, Trey, Vu? Anything striking you guys in the conversation? I know, Vu, that you guys are thinking about your own potential restructuring.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, we actually just got a grad student to start looking at different models, including yours, Hildy. And so she might be reaching out to you. I sent her your paper, if that's okay. Several things. I really appreciated her just sort of reframing this away from the sort of action orientation. This is something I think Rebecca and I talked about in Boise years ago. We're talking about how we're just so focused on action when so many communities don't really respond to that sort of frame set. We are relational, and we're like against this to-do mentality, and it's more to be. So yeah, my board is really on board with just trying to explore a different model. I'm also kind of concerned, I guess not concerned, but just trying to figure out how this works, because Inspiral is an LLC with no employees, and that is a different model. I'm also interested in how we can really incorporate sort of cultural relevance and competency into this, because sometimes when we have these very relational sort of aspects, it can work really well. Or this is another way for dominant cultures and people to just use, a while ago, obviously did have a model that's very similar to this, where it's very community-centric board. And we had several work groups, and the board members were scattered across different work groups. They met once a month, and during the meeting, just like you said, we couldn't tell who was a board member, who was just a community member or a committee chair. And it was amazing. The energy was amazing. But then as we started getting more and more staff, there was a lot of role confusion. And we got a bunch more staff because people were burning out. Board members, community members were burning out. I would imagine the golden pandas would probably at times wish that there was just a finance person handling all that stuff. And so all of these things would be really important, but I do think that this is really critical for the entire sector is on edge about the board structure. It is, I have a rule of 1/3, which is I think 1/3 of boards are actually effective, 1/3 are useless, and 1/3 are kind of destructive to the organizations that they serve, which means that 2/3 of them are useless or destructive. And that is not a good model. And we just haven't really been able. So, and
I think you're giving the benefit of the doubt. I don't know about the third that's working.
Gonna say you're very generous.
Yeah, it would have been, yeah. So I don't know. And obviously we're trying to reinvent everything. The way that we do fundraising in the sector is just, I think it causes a lot of damage. It reinforces saviorism. The way that we have this ED as a central figure and decisions being made at the top level, it's also nonsensical. So obviously it has been challenging every single norm except for the board. That's just something we just accepted as the default model. And I'm really glad that we're having these conversations here.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Justin and I spent a greater part of last year having conversations with really the legal aspects of what does this mean, talking to our attorney, talking to Iffy, who was at Harbor Compliance for 1.5 to 2 years. And it was so interesting when we kept asking the question, legally, what does a board have to do? And when your attorney says, yeah, not really anything, they need to exist. And they need to be there when somebody says, so where was the board in this? And they need to be there so there's somebody to talk. But there is virtually nowhere that legally defines this is what a board has to do. It may be in a state constitution, state by state, in the US, but in the US at least there is, and you know, if he's nodding from the compliance perspective, and you know, we could not get a list out of the attorney who's been doing this for a lot of years of okay, so what does a board have to do? And so what became clear is that you want to meet IRS expectations. What does that mean? It means in Arizona, where we're incorporated, you only need to legally have one board member. The IRS would probably like to see more than that. Okay, we'll have more. The thing that I love about what Enspiral is doing and about its replicability, again, you know, I'm looking at, and I was thinking of you, Vu, when I was talking about the fact that we run programs and have people out doing stuff. Most organizations, if we're looking at developing models that can be replicated, most organizations are going to be running programs. They're not going to be what Enspiral has. But the thing that I love about it is is the balance between, okay, if the board is about compliance, so that if somebody knocks on the door, whether it's the IRS or whomever, you got somebody there that says, here's what we did to tick the boxes. And your decision making is, you've got a codified way of making decisions that involves everybody, in my mind, that would be involved in that the decision would impact. What does it take to involve the people that the decision would at least immediately impact? To me, those were two big questions, and it's one of the things that I like about their particular form. But yeah, I agree that in terms of what does it look like for organizations that fall into, I will allow your generous assessment, both the 66% that are messing up and the 33% that want to do something well. You know, doing it well, doing what well, and that's raises all of those questions. So thank you for that.
I think one of the 1/3 that's, you know, that kind of in the middle third that Vu is probably, I would generously say, I think they have good intentions. I think that one of the things that applies to the sector is this idea of like what has really caught hold as expectations of a board, and that there's a piece of, in any case of doing something different, right, is a level of the change management in terms of how you support people moving into a different model, you know, and having that understanding or being ready with the language around the design for people who raise the question, because I do think that there's this idea of what the board is accountable for that is in fact not true. And, you know, that came up in the conversation that I had with Hildy and Justin, this question of, you know, what's required. And the fact is next to nothing. There's really very little, except that everybody in the country thinks that there is a ton expected. And so like kind of, you know, there is that piece of at least being prepared for how you manage, respond to, you know, what's your clean answer if questions arise. I don't think that determines necessarily what you do. It's like, how do you not get weighted down and have those efforts and the mission buried under, right? Because it's not even the sector's expectation, it's everybody else. And I've actually thought about that a lot since Panos conference where Vu spoke, because like something about that in-person reaction to Vu on a stage, encouraging everybody to like essentially throw out their idea of fundraising or throw out their ideas of how organizations are structured. And this is what these are what our responses should be to funder questions. And this is what funders should be doing. And then there's what it would like, all the people who like, oh my God, he's so right. That's totally what we should be doing. He's the greatest thing ever. And then they go back to their office and they just can't bring themselves to type that into a grant application. Like we just can't bring ourselves to do it differently because what, you know, like there is this also this, I think, a fear on the part of the sector of what happens if I'm the person who does it differently and everybody else is still doing it the same. Which is part of what I love about this group is getting out of that, the fear-based decision making. But I do think there is just that piece of awareness, right? And knowing that, you know, as you talk about it, kind of what are those really simple, digestible responses almost to doing it differently? Because it is something that I think ultimately, you know, shakes up, and I do it with standards for excellence. I question standards for excellence all the time. I'm president of a board that runs a standards for excellence program. And I keep saying, like, who were the people who came up with this? Because it falsely sends a message that, and so, you know, I'm on both sides where I'm participating in sending a false message and trying to undo the message at the same time in terms of what is required of boards.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, Vu, to your point about action versus process, that we have a tendency to ascribe roles and responsibilities as the fix for ensuring process. And what we forget is the actual capacity that we're trying to create. And, you know, I sort of come to this question always asking now, what is the added benefit that the board provides? If we think about it as an asset, so it more should come out of it than we put into it as an organization, and really defining what is the best benefit that entity can provide that does further the overall community benefit that the organization is trying to ensure. But that's actually just a series of questions, not a series of roles and responsibilities. It's really sort of saying, what is it that we can contribute? And I think the one caveat, I do appreciate, Iffy, what you're saying of sort of this, you know, what's required versus what's expected. I think there is a clear legal obligation to be a fiduciary. Or actually, I'm going to go back on myself, not to be a fiduciary. There's a clear obligation because it always says to act in the best interest of the organization. That's most of the statutes have something around that of the trustee. And that's true for profit, nonprofit. It's true. That's just what a trustee is supposed to make decisions for the benefit of the organization, and how that gets interpreted is, but really what, if we look at that and just say, the job is to ensure the capacity exists to do that. I don't have to be an HR specialist on the board to make decisions about HR policy. In fact, it's obscene that you would ask me to approve an HR policy because, you know, I'm going to do something illegal. I'm going to approve something illegal because I don't know. It would be more my job to say, who knows this?
Right.
Who knows what it looks like for an entity to have policies that accomplish what we want them to accomplish for people, and ensure that that happens, that's there, which I think starts to bridge, not necessarily easily, but some of what you're talking about, Vu, which is when you start to have these professionalized structures, the expertise is no longer in the board. So to think that the board is making decisions and providing oversight of the expertise, you know, it's the fools in charge of the experts. And, the genius is the person who knows what they don't know and says, please find someone who knows this so that I can feel confident it's being done well. And like, if we actually just think about boards as that, like, there are a bunch of people whose job it is to ensure that the smartest, most knowledgeable, most familiar people with whatever it is that needs to happen for the organization and its constituents.
I think
they're in charge.
Thanks, Justin. I think what I really appreciated about what Hildy said earlier is just shifting the role of the board from really focusing on its own, protecting and preserving the organization, towards ensuring that the organization and the community is getting what it needs. And I think this is critical. I talk about the nonprofit Hunger Games all the time, about how we nonprofits have been trained to fight with one another, and it becomes very cutthroat on occasion. And I think the board structure reinforces this. I actually had a friend of mine, we had lunch, and he was just distraught with his board chair because he was introducing his a colleague, another ED, to one of his donors, and his board chair got angry. He's like, "It's not your place to protect other people's missions." And this is how the boards have been trained to think. And I think what's really exciting is getting them out of that role where they are the ones who are out there in the community. They are the ambassadors. And I don't know, they should be thinking broadly about what does the community actually need. But instead, we force them to become very tribalistic with their own organization. And I think this has been doing a huge disservice to the sector. And this is a way to get them back towards that more expansive. So I think the board's role in protecting the ecosystem and the entire community.
Oops.
And not just one organization's mission, I think is exciting and necessary.
Okay. Carl.
So what Vu said just really resonates with me. All the thinking that we've been doing here, I think just in the last couple of years, has all been about how do we not just see ourselves as leaders of individual organizations, but as leaders of networks and communities. And almost that idea of how do you lead the spaces between organizations is just as important as how do you lead the actual organization. And the word that Vu used just then and Justin used just before that I would like us to be talking about much more is trust. And it's interesting, there's an awful lot of guff, a lot of crap written in this country about, oh, the public don't trust charities or non-profits anymore. And a bit of work that's just been done recently about the future of civil society talked about the fact that the problem of trust that we've got isn't that the public out there don't trust charities. The problem of trust that we've got is that we in the sector don't trust each other, because precisely of what Vu has just been saying, and because we don't trust each other, we don't work as a system or as a sort of a network. So for me, I'd sort of like boards to sort of think about how do we bring back trust to the forefront of the agenda, and really think about what that might mean, because trust, it strikes me as far more useful than some of these rubbish sort of impact indicators that we use to hold each other to our account, that are a bit of a shortcut to trust. Trust, actually, it's hard work. It takes time. And that's when before, I think, was it Justin, you talked about boards being an asset? One of the roles that they could play, if they're one of our assets, is bringing that sort of time and dealing with that challenge of how to build real trust.
See, and I'm thinking that, and again, it comes from that question of, if we did not have any of the current structures we currently have, what would we build? I don't know that I'd build a board to be in charge of trust. I think building a culture, organization-wide, system-wide, ecosystem-wide, what that requires is A, first modeling what that looks like. It B, requires looking at some serious systemic change, because Vu alluded before to something that we've talked about since we've talked about fundraising. And the reason that we have not sought grants is we don't want to participate in a system that is going directly counter to building trust in the world. That you cannot simultaneously make people compete for funding, and then expect them to trust each other. And work and play nicely together. So we're talking about systemic change at a pretty significant level. But I think that it doesn't start with a board. I think that by making the assumption that that acting in a fiduciary manner, it's what I liked about what Susan was saying before, what Justin was saying before, that if that becomes system-wide within the organization, and I use that word organization loosely, within the network, within the ecosystem that Creating the Future is operating in, and we bring that to the table at every single point, then you don't need a board for that. The board must participate in that. The board must model that, but so must everyone else. And to me, those are the kinds of conversations that get me really excited, is the thought that everything, I loved what you said before, Iffy. If you took the list, and Justin, you as well, if you took the answer to the questions that people ask is, so who's going to do X? And my answer is always, who's doing it now? And the answer is never the board. And if it is the board, generally, as you noted, Vu, not well. So if the thing needs to be done and it needs to be done well, the question isn't, will the board do it? The question is, where is it best done well? And what will it take for that to be done well? And repeatedly, when people say, well, boards have to do X, the first thing is, do they really? And how well are they doing it now? And are you a little tired of fighting with them to do it? And do they really have to do it? Why do they have to do it? Okay, so if X needs to be done, here's a list of 9 million other ways that it can be done. And again, when we're looking at using catalytic thinking and applying catalytic thinking to every single issue that comes up, when the issues come up, and the answer is, okay, we're going to use the framework. We're going to reach for what's possible. We're going to listen. We're going to reach for what's possible. We're going to ask what good looks like. We're going to ask what the conditions are that will lead to good, and what are the actions that will create those conditions, is a very different conversation than what should the board do. And so that gets me really excited. But the main thing, one of the things that I'm going to be writing a lot about, I've been writing about it privately, I'm going to be writing about it more publicly, is if we are to look at what's actually governing organizations, and I know we've talked about that in this group as well, if we are to look at what's actually governing organizations, it is not the board and it is not the CEO, it's fear. Fear is governing organizations. And so we have this opportunity to create a completely different structure that says, yeah, we're not going to have fear governing what we do. That is immensely exciting to me. Trey,
apologies, everyone. I have to run to another meeting, but
well, Vu, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Trey, you've been thoughtful. What's going on in that beautiful brain of yours?
Oh, thoughtful is probably the kindest word. Ruminating might be, but yeah. So first of all, very rich conversation. I love tuning back in and reconnecting into the energy. I've had the opportunity to watch videos and things, but to actually be live is always more fun. So there's a few things. What really, I think I keep coming back to is how Inspiral started, right? Because Inspiral started as a bunch of coders and programmers and consultants and people who just really wanted to do something more contributive, more generative. And Inspiral really isn't a methodology, right? Inspiral is a way of being that is participatory and that is inclusive and is questioning the status quo. And so what struck me as she was speaking and in the conversation that's followed here is how that beingness transcends the methodology, transcends structure even. And that there is a blurring of the lines between what we would deem business activity and nonprofit activity, and that beingness is based in principles. And that's where I see that the similarities and the cross functionality and the parallels might be the word, between what's happening over in the sort of Inspiral net, we'll call it a network, and the Creating the Future network. I really find it interesting because I've been reading a lot and having conversations with John Hagel at Deloitte Center for the Edge. And there's been this wonderful emergence of the difference between story and narrative, and how stories are finite and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's usually a punchline, and the narrative, which is sort of the raising of the conversation to a level that is around purpose and around fundamental reasons for being, which then undergird fundamental reasons for doing. And I always get a kick out of how marketing adopts community language. And what it does is it actually makes our work as community builders a little bit harder, because marketing uses these spins on these words like engagement, for example, and community, and uses it in very self-serving branding kinds of ways. And what we forget is, relative to a word like ecosystem, because that word gets thrown around so much now. It's like, oh, the ecosystem of this and the ecosystem of that. And I'm like, okay, so where's the ecology behind the ecosystem? Because ultimately you don't have an ecosystem unless there's an ecology undergirding it. And that again comes back to that place of beingness. And I love having conversations with Susan. I had the privilege of having two one-on-one conversations with her in another context last year, and just really loving hearing the narrative beyond the stories, and hearing that there is a real openness, and how that openness, it's not about facilitating it, but how that openness plants the seeds, perhaps, for something that reaches beyond step by steps. Because the tendency is to want to drill something down to a step by step by step by step, when really it's more messy than that. And it's about experimentation that is less about predetermining a hypothesis and is more about just being in the experiment and iterating on the question. And so these are all these things that are ruminating in my mind right now. So it's not a specific, put the push pin into the corkboard and say, yeah, here it is. It's more of sort of this flow of thoughts and ideas, and a blend of context and content, and just really, further to Vu's point earlier when he was talking about it being relational, which everybody else has sort of spun off on in different ways, that's really the key. And I get excited when true relationality, I don't even know if that's a word, happens in a business context, and the power that can happen, the ripple effect that then cycles back to the community that sparked, I won't say originated, but sparked that beingness. And so these are all things that are going through my head. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's what's going on.
Yes.
That's what's going on in my brain.
Yep. Yep. Oh, it absolutely makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, Carl.
Sorry, Trey. The stuff that sort of resonated with me as well from what Vu said was this thing about it being relational. We feel sort of very conscious at the moment that so many of the things that we call networks for getting things done, they're not really networks at all. They're just email lists where we email people, but we call them networks. And trying to think about how we can make the way that we do things more relational is one of the toughest nuts to crack for us. So these sorts of conversations that help me sort of think about what relational means and how we get there, that's one of the things that I find really valuable about these, because I don't know the answers.
Thank you.
There's one thing, and I think, yeah, I know Vu mentioned it a little bit here, but certainly in a lot of the stuff that he's talking about, there is a, there's a fundamental shift of what you are accountable to that underlies all of this. I mean, that for this to really work, and going back, Hildy, to what you said, which is if what fundamentally we're talking about is the benefit of our communities, we have to give ourselves over to some of those more objective measures of community outcomes, the health and well-being of our communities. And I think, Iffy, you were sort of getting at it with the funding thing, is we try to protect ourselves from actually having to be accountable for the fact that people are dying, people are living in poverty, that our environment is, falling apart. And we construct these other mechanisms for evaluating success that really continue to put up walls between what's really actually happening to people in our communities. And I think that's another one of those fears. What happens when we actually have to become more objective around the outcomes of the work that we do? And the onus, I mean, it scares the hell out of people. I mean, I don't know about all of you, but whenever I do work with organizations and I put that framing, they always say, well, we can't measure that. How are we supposed to know that? And they put all these buffers up in front of them to say, we can't be held accountable to that because we can't affect that, or it's too big, or it might not, it's going to look bad if we, do that. And in doing so, we keep narrowing the field and the actual data and information people have to do what we're asking them to do as fiduciaries. I mean, we've neutered them. I mean, if I were to think about most organizations, and I do think Vu is very generous with saying 1/3, most boards, and it has nothing to do with the people, simply do not actually have access to the information they need to be a fiduciary. And the organization doesn't actually have a mechanism for really elevating the critical data that says, are we making a difference in the world? Are we changing something? Are we seeing behaviors shift? And I think that's an element too for creating the future, is to say, okay, where do we balance and figure out how to define some set of objective measures that we need to recognize may impact our subjective opinions about the way we do our work, the philosophical ideology that we have that's there, because there is a releasing that has to happen for people to really authentically be able to step into this. That's just sort of what's going on in my head.
Yeah, and I wish we didn't have just 5 minutes left, because of course, we, all of us could go another 2 hours on this, and that is awesome. We will be meeting again in February and really starting to look at, and we're going to need to reschedule. I'm hoping we can bump a week, because Angie and Rebecca and I and Iffy are going to be working on a project together that's going to take all day the Monday of our board meeting. So we'll be getting back to you guys to reschedule. But the big questions that are coming up, that are the exciting questions, are and because we've been in the thinking and being for 3 years, we started this conversation in 2015. Wow. Is what are we going to do? And that's about some pretty concrete things, about bylaws, about how we be with each other, about systems, about recruiting whoever is going to be on that board that we are talking about, because this is a board of people, and I use that word loosely. This is a group of humans who love these conversations, and these are not the conversations a board will have when they're focused just on compliance. So it may be completely different people who love the compliance stuff, which is not going to be me. But we will be getting back together again in February. These reflections have been remarkable. Is there any, because we have 3 more minutes together, is there any final reflection somebody would like to add that has not been in the mix before we leave each other?
I'll go quick. Just quickly, I'm thinking of what you just said, Hilding. I've been thinking of it the whole time. Imagine the deluge of human capital and potential that will be back out in the world if people are no longer in boards that are thinking like it's a big time commitment, like that aren't moving missions forward. The reality of our board composition, who's going to be responsible for one piece of our infrastructure, along with all these other pieces of infrastructure, will be people who delight in that little piece. And then anyone else who wants to share their true gifts and true potential will be plugged in all different kinds of ways. And that will make, that will be moving the mission forward with an accelerated pace.
Yeah. Dimitri, you had something?
Yeah. The thought that had gone through my mind is, we govern by fear, but we also follow examples.
Make it louder.
But we also follow examples, and you know, my favorite analogy, Indiana Jones in the Search for the Holy Grail, this big abyss in front of him, has the courage to step out. The moment he steps out, everybody else behind him can walk through. So the ability to look at this structure and to face the fear that's there based on historical past here, to be able to show other organizations, wait a minute, you don't have to do it this way. And the power of Rebecca, what you were saying in terms of what happens when all of those people are now released, you know, to cross that chasm, to move into accountability for the world and what's there. So that's the sort of imagery that's been going through my mind as you talked about these different things, is the power of what we're doing and the power of what could happen if that accountability is in the world for making it a better place. And we're not ignoring the fact that there's horrible things out there, but we can't do anything.
Thank you, guys. We will see you in February, and the conversation will continue. Very grateful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.